In Spain, Manel and his wife Julia are driving home. Julia brings up the topic of having children because Manel hasn't decided yet, and she needs clarity to plan for their future. They start arguing, which distracts them, causing Julia to swerve to avoid an oncoming car. Unfortunately, their car ends up in the middle of the road, where a large truck crashes into it, causing it to roll over. A year later, Manel is a widower, living alone with his cat. On TV, news reports reveal that the UN is considering border closures due to a mysterious virus spreading. Preventative measures are failing, and people are becoming violent at the borders in attempts to escape. Deep in his grief, Manel barely pays attention and eventually mutes the TV, missing footage showing a hospital patient slowly turning into a zombie. Later, Manel goes for a drive and notices an ambulance passing by. Around town, graffiti on walls warns that the end is near. At the harbor, he meets two women interested in buying his boat, which he hasn't used since his wife passed. While searching for the boat's documents, he finds Julia's bracelet, bringing back bittersweet memories. On his way home, Manel receives a call from his sister, which he ignores. At the supermarket, he notices that people are stockpiling food, almost emptying the shelves. Back home, he ties the bracelet around his cat's neck as news breaks that the virus has spread to Spain. That evening, Manel video calls his sister Belén, who shares significant news. Her family is being relocated to the Canary Islands due to her husband's government work, and she invites Manel to join them. Manel, however, declines. The next day, Manel notices that all his neighbors are leaving, so he decides to do the same and brings his cat along. While driving, he hears on the radio that a new variant of the virus is spreading rapidly through Europe. This new strain has a shortened incubation period of only a few minutes and is transmitted through wounds and bites. At the airport, Manel sends Belén a message, saying he'll be joining her after all. As people try to board the plane, tickets start getting denied with no explanation, causing the crowd to grow agitated, yelling at an employee who seems just as clueless. Suddenly, the main screen displays that all flights are canceled, and everyone receives a message on their phones about a civil security alert. The crowd panics, with some trying to force their way onto the plane. Manel gets a call from Belén, advising him to go back home and stay there until they know more. Just then, a man grabs a gun from the guards and threatens to fire, causing everyone to flee the airport in a rush. As he heads home, Manel finds himself stuck in heavy traffic, with the radio reporting that all roads and bridges are in a similar state of lockdown. Military helicopters are flying overhead as people begin abandoning their cars, arguing with each other. The news shares that military personnel have been evacuated and riots have broken out to the point where many soldiers were injured. Eventually, with the situation worsening, many drivers give up on waiting and start walking. Manel takes his cat and decides to do the same. By the time he reaches his neighborhood, night has fallen, and he finds a group of soldiers surrounding a building, setting up a special tunnel around a house. He hears strange noises coming from within and is shocked when two soldiers emerge, carrying a zombie out of the house as the wife of the infected man cries outside. The zombie is taken away in a military vehicle, and Manel realizes he knew the infected man. Afterward, Manel goes home and falls asleep, dreaming about the accident and Julia's death. The next morning, Belén video calls him, explaining that safe zones are being organized to relocate people. However, there's tension within the military because bringing more people into the safe zones increases the risk of virus spread, a challenge other countries have already faced. She strongly advises Manel to stay home, no matter what. Soon after, major cities begin enforcing quarantines, refusing to let people seek refuge within their limits, which leads to more riots in the streets. The virus is now completely out of control, and residents start witnessing zombies attacking people around the neighborhood, filming it for social media. Others create videos sharing tips on building armor and defending themselves. That afternoon, the government declares a state of emergency with new restrictions. All businesses must close by 2 p.m., and civilians may be called to assist the military. The next time Manel goes to the supermarket, he finds shelves almost empty with people grabbing items directly from one another's hands. He manages to gather a few essentials and, on his way out, sees fighter jets flying by. Later, he stops at a gas station for supplies, where a wounded police officer stumbles upon him, then locks himself inside the station store using his handcuffs. Soon, more people arrive, fleeing in terror as a zombie suddenly attacks another officer, biting his face. Manel grabs a mop, preparing to defend himself, but just before the zombie reaches him, the injured officer shoots it, causing zombie blood to splatter on Manel's face. Inside the store, the locked-up cop begins pounding on the glass as he starts transforming. A shaken Manel tries to check on the officer who fired, but the officer, in desperation, fires at the ground to keep Manel away. After Manel leaves with his supplies, the officer takes his own life. Later that day, the president appears on TV announcing an extended lockdown with criminal penalties for those who refuse to cooperate with military evacuation efforts. Following online tutorials, Manel reinforces his home, strengthening the outer walls and installing a security camera. That evening, the army arrives in his neighborhood to evacuate it, but Belen sends him a message, urging him to stay put, promising to come for him soon. Manel turns off the lights and hides with his cat as soldiers knock on his door. Thankfully, they move on without breaking in or noticing him at the window. 2 weeks later, Manel is running low on food and is unable to reach his sister because phone service is down. After much hesitation, he gathers tools for self-defense, covers himself with layers for protection, and finally leaves his home. He searches several houses for supplies but finds nothing. Eventually, he encounters an elderly woman named Gabriela, who couldn't join the evacuation because she's in a wheelchair. Although she doesn't have food, she tells him about neighbors who stocked up before the lockdown. Manel visits the houses Gabriela mentioned and finally finds food and other useful supplies, including a bicycle. The bike allows him to travel further and gather more supplies, which he shares with Gabriela. He also gives her a walkie-talkie to communicate while he's out. Now there's only one house left to visit, the one where soldiers found a zombie. Manel finds no food inside, but he spots a tank with dead fish. Suddenly, sensing someone behind him, he fires his weapon, thinking it's a zombie. It turns out to be another survivor who quickly runs away, fearing Manel's aggression. After collecting what he needs, Manel continues finding supplies, and over time, he and Gabriela begin meeting regularly to share meals. One night, after drinking, Manel sends Gabriela a message expressing regret for not spending more time with his family. He dreams about the accident, recalling how he and Julia were airlifted to the hospital. Gabriela wakes him up over the walkie-talkie, urging him to turn on the radio. Manel listens to a broadcast sharing coordinates for a rescue group transporting survivors to the Canary Islands. He suggests they could reach it using his boat, but Gabriela insists she'd only slow him down. Manel promises her he'll take care of her. The following morning, Manel becomes concerned when Gabriela doesn't respond to his calls. He rushes to her home and discovers she has taken her own life, leaving behind a note thanking him for the companionship. On his way back, a zombie attacks him, managing to disarm him in the struggle. Manel barely escapes a bite, saved by the layers of protection he's wearing, though the zombie spits blood on his face. He retrieves his weapon and kills the zombie, placing her ID on her chest out of respect, in case authorities ever find her. Back at his home, Manel boils water to disinfect his equipment and leaves a message for Belen, explaining that he can't wait for her any longer. Taking his cat, he sets off on his bike, speeding down empty roads. He soon encounters a roadblock and decides to cut through the forest with zombies close behind him. In the forest, he stumbles upon an abandoned camp and, despite fearing what he might find, has no choice but to pass through. As he rides through, a large horde of zombie campers appears, and Manel races to dodge them and avoid crashing. He makes it across the camp without being bitten, reaching another road blocked by a pile of bodies. Going too fast to stop in time, he crashes, though his cat remains safe inside its crate. Hearing zombies approaching, Manel tries to start his bike, but it won't turn on, forcing him to run. He bolts through the forest as fast as he can, with zombies on his heels, until he finally reaches the harbor. Crossing a bridge, he locks the gate behind him, but the zombies soon start pounding on the gate, breaking through it and continuing to chase him. Just when Manel thinks all hope is lost, he spots an abandoned boat in the water. He swims to it and tries the engine, but it won't start. As he investigates, he finds a zombie baby stuck in a seat on board. He ultimately leaves with his cat on a small raft. He follows the directions from the radio broadcast, though he still has no signal, and he keeps recording messages for his sister. That night, the raft stops moving, and Manel discovers a corpse tangled in the engine. A bright light approaches, and he waves frantically for help. The light turns out to be a boat with Ukrainian sailors who agree to let him on board. On board the ship, Manel and his cat are given food and a room. Victor, the only crew member who speaks Spanish, explains that the Canary Islands are under quarantine. The authorities did not allow evacuees to disembark, leaving many stranded and leading to the spread of the virus among them. Manel agrees to help the crew locate important supplies in exchange for safety. That night, Manel hears voices and sees survivors on a boat calling for help. In the morning, Manel asks Victor about the new survivors, but Victor denies anyone came. Later, Manel is called to the captain's office to help locate buildings like hospitals and factories on a map. While exploring, Manel finds the survivors' boat inside the ship and spots their belongings with the crew. He confronts Victor, who warns him to stay out of it. But Manel presses on, mentioning that he knows where to find a helicopter, and Victor eventually agrees to escape with him. The two carefully sneak around, freeing another survivor, but guards spot them and start shooting. They flee, with Victor sustaining a shoulder wound. Once they reach shore, Manel leads Victor to the hospital where Julia died, hoping to find the helicopter. During the journey, Victor explains the captain's dark intentions. He was building a refuge where only those who served him were allowed to live, while women and children were taken advantage of. When they reach the hospital, Manel is heartbroken to find the helicopter gone, and zombies attack them, forcing Manel to fight for survival. Inside, they find a nurse named Lucia and Sister Cecilia, who help tend to Victor's wound. When Manel mentions the helicopter, Lucia reveals it's parked in the quarantine area behind the hospital, which is filled with zombies. That night, Manel and the group share what little food remains, and Manel visits the room where Julia passed, tying her bracelet to the bed as a tribute. The next morning, Manel goes to the roof to observe the zombie horde, and his phone unexpectedly receives a signal, allowing him to see messages from Belen that had been delayed. As he records a reply, gunfire erupts below, and Manel looks out to see the ship's crew shooting zombies to gain access to the hospital. Manel rushes to warn the others, and they decide to attempt reaching the helicopter by escaping through the basement. The basement is filled with smoke and bodies, so they cover their noses and carefully move forward. When they find a blocked door, they break it open with an axe, only to have a zombie lunge out and bite Cecilia. Manel pulls the zombie off, pressing its face to a hot pipe, while Lucia kills it with the axe. Realizing she's infected, Cecilia urges the group to continue without her. They reach a corridor blocked by furniture, and Lucia manages to open a door without noise, but a child cries out upon seeing her mother among the zombies. Though they proceed quietly, a sudden clatter from falling shelves alerts the zombies. Manel hides with the child in a cabinet as the creatures close in. Just when it seems they're trapped, the ship's crew arrives and kills the zombies. After a tense exchange, the crew leaves without noticing them. The group finally reaches the exit and finds the yard swarming with zombies. Recalling a tutorial he saw, Manel fashions a shield from cages, allowing them to move through the crowd slowly. When a wheel gets stuck, the noise attracts more zombies, forcing Lucia and Manel to defend the group while Victor pushes the cage forward. They reach the gate, where Lucia breaks the chain with her axe. She and Manel stay behind to hold off the zombies, while Victor and the children make a run for the helicopter. After a final struggle, Lucia and Manel manage to lock the gate with a scarf and join the others. But when Victor tries to start the helicopter, it fails to turn on, and the zombies begin climbing over the fence. Just as Manel prepares to defend them, Victor spots an unplugged cable, reconnects it, and finally gets the helicopter started. The sound of the helicopter engine draws the attention of the ship's crew, who arrive in the yard and start shooting at zombies. They cut through the scarf, locking the gate, and threaten to shoot if the group doesn't cooperate. Victor subtly signals Manel, who then breaks open another gate, letting a new wave of zombies rush in, surrounding the ship's crew. As chaos unfolds, a few zombies approach the helicopter, so Victor lifts it slightly to knock them off. Meanwhile, Manel fights his way through the horde with an axe. Once all nearby zombies are down, Lucia throws down a ladder, and Manel quickly climbs aboard, reuniting with his newfound friends and his cat. Hours later, the helicopter approaches the Canary Islands. Just as hope seems within reach, Manel receives a call from Belen, urging him not to come. A pair of fighter jets zoom past, confirming that the islands too have fallen to infection,